Hello and welcome to the Trauma-Informed SLP. I am Kim Neely, and this is a podcast where we learn to promote safety and empowerment in everyone we know, including ourselves. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. So excited to finally bring this interview to you all. I learned a lot of hard lessons about editing, interviewing for podcasting, and but it's done. Here it is. Might not be perfect, but hopefully listenable, because lots of really good information in this episode. And actually, series of episodes, actually. Janice and we chatted. I recorded for nearly 3 hours with her. And honestly, so much of it was so good. I didn't actually want to cut out hardly anything. So I actually decided to split this up into 2 main episodes. So this is just the first one. It's going to give you lots of good background into Janice and her experience with facilitated communication and things like that. And then the second one that will be released hopefully in a week, maybe 2. I do have a little conference thing to prepare for, so might be 2. But let's hope for 1. Personal goal for 1, but maybe 2. We're going to plan the ADHD brain way of let's give ourselves a hard deadline, but then also tell everybody it's actually a soft deadline, because it probably actually is. That's called accommodations and strategizing. Okay, anyway, so the second episode will go more into detail with some of these things and kind of get into broader ethical implications and such. And then there actually is a segment we got into near the end of our discussion that I'm actually going to put on my new Patreon page as bonus content. Yes, that is right. This is a little plug, little announcement. You can fast forward through this if you wish. But my intent with the Patreon is to be a supportive community of mostly SLPs, probably. I'm going to guess as an SLP, I'm probably going to attract a fair number of SLPs, but really any helping professional out there, teachers, educators in general, speech language pathologist, occupational therapist, physical therapist, or mental health specialist. Any of you guys out there, or nurses, any of you guys who want a community, I'm hoping to create at least a little bit more of a community. Oh, right. And also students in any of these professions as well. I'm hoping to really create a great community, a supportive community where we can get a little more validation and a little more normalization for all the struggles we're having throughout the day. Whether it's our work-related stuff or maybe just the world in general and things that are just really hitting us right now, because the world is pretty tough. So it's going to be a space. There's going to be chats open. I already have a few chat threads that I started just off the top of my head as spaces to go to vent or whatnot. But I also want to start out with doing maybe some Zoom calls or some live chats, Q&A type stuff where we can all start to bounce ideas off of each other. We can bring issues we have with maybe any sort of toxicity in the workplace or something like that. Just a place to go, because the world's really hard. Obviously, don't have to tell anybody that. We can definitely tell it's very hard right now. And the news cycles are really hitting. Phew. I always love that Fred Rogers quote, where he said his mother said to always look for the helpers during troubled times. But at the same time, when you are a helper, who's looking after you, right? We need to kind of look after each other, I think. So that's the idea here. And also as a place just to help with, in the trauma literature, one of the most effective ways of combating chronic stress and traumatic stress and things like this is creating supportive community and having access to a supportive community. So a safe, supportive community. So I'm hoping that's what the Patreon will be. I have a link in the show notes. Take a look. I have a promotion going on. You can get 3 months for free with that link there, or it's free through March 3rd at the moment, but I can always extend that a little bit if you are in any sort of financial trouble, or if any of the tiers would be a bit of a stress for you, let me know. I could definitely hook you up, because I don't want this to be inaccessible or too much of a strain. So before you click over to that link, I guess you could do it while you're listening, but beforehand, go ahead and give this episode a listen because I think this is really important stuff. And I will be going into a little bit more of a background on what this episode will be about and a little bit more into Janice now. I am very excited for this new episode here. This is my first official interview with somebody, with a guest, and I'm so excited. And I had an absolutely fantastic conversation with Janice Boynton. And she is an artist, educator, and advocate for evidence based practices in the field of communication sciences and disorders. Her story is she was a former facilitator using facilitated communication back in the 1990s here in the United States, and she was featured on Frontline's Prisoners of Silence. To date, she is one of the few facilitators worldwide to publicly acknowledge her role in producing facilitated communicated messages and speak out against its use. She left teaching to pursue her artwork, but has continued to be active in educating people about the dangers of facilitated communication, or FC, as you'll hear her reference it as, and other facilitator-influenced techniques, including the newer ones like the spell to communicate and rapid prompting method and all the other various ones that are out there that are cropping up these days. She was the recipient of the 2023 James Randi Education Foundation Award for her work in the field of skepticism. And I was so excited to get her on my podcast because I did that episode, which I believe I just re-released for you guys actually, on my response to the telepathy tapes. And in that, I talked a lot about, at least on the audio podcast, that episode's different than the one that was on YouTube. I do have a YouTube video on that as well, which I went way more into AAC and questioning the more facilitated type of techniques that are being used. But, I wanted to make a response to that because, well, it is, I believe their second season came out, I think, because it started cropping up again on SLP subreddits and other various places where people are talking about it. And back when I produced that initial episode, Janice actually reached out to me on email and ended up adding, I believe, the YouTube episode to facilitatedcommunication.org, which is the website that she runs with a few other people. It sounds like it promotes it, but it does not. That's the intelligence of grabbing that website address. And we had a great back and forth on email about the dangers and the issue with all of this. And I've been wanting to get into interviewing more with people, and so I thought she might be a wonderful guest to have as I saw this topic come back up. From the trauma-informed perspective, I wanted to take more of a what happened to them approach in the sense of why do people get into this? What are the promises that they're given? What is the psychology around people who use these techniques or go to use these techniques or go to the trainings and learn these techniques? Like, what is the messaging and what is the psychology around that? And I thought Janice would be a wonderful person to talk to as well, in the sense that she was kind of on the front line essentially in the 90s, at least in the United States. I know in Australia it happened a little prior, but here in the United States, she was essentially on the front lines of the court-ordered studies that debunked it. And she'll talk about her experiences with those tests and how she came to realize that she was actually authoring the messages and it was not actually the student she was working with like she thought. And I just thought, what a fascinating approach, because I do truly believe that if we take more of the approach of having some level of understanding and compassion for the people who want to grab hold of the promises of these techniques, right? Then I think hopefully we can do a more effective job of advocating against it without alienating the people who, these techniques promise to solve a lot of very genuine concerns, right? And so I think it's fair to take a peek behind the curtain, essentially, is sort of what I wanted to do with this. And so I hope you enjoy it. It was just an absolutely wonderful, completely fascinating interview. I learned so much doing this there was so much going on behind the scenes in trainings and what they're teaching and how they're actually co-opting certain terms, which is really important. I think that's really critical to know that for proponents of these techniques, when they say independent communication and when they say presumed competence, they actually mean different things than what those of us outside of this think we're using those terms for. So, thank you all so much for listening, and I hope you enjoy this episode. Thank you so much for being here. My first official guest. Yay! So exciting.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate that.
Talking about kind of a tough topic, but, I just want to get your perspective because I think you have great perspectives and obviously a lot of experience out there.
Yeah, who knew I'd still be talking about FC 30 years after it was debunked?
I know. Oh my God. The cycle of history. It's got to be a little tough to see it repeating over and over.
Well, it never really went away. It kind of went underground for a while and then came back. So
that makes sense. Yeah, little resurgence. Yeah. I guess there will always be some niche things that will never quite go away in society when it comes to certain things.
Yeah.
So, could you go ahead and introduce a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, well, I'll start with I'm not teaching anymore. I'm an artist now, but when I got into facilitated communication, I was a speech language clinician in the public schools. And a student moved into the district that was already using facilitated communication. So this was 1991 or 92. I forget whether I think it was 92, 93 that I was involved with it. And so she came with a facilitator, and because I was a speech language person on staff, we all as a team decided that I would kind of explore facilitated communication, and none of us really knew. It was brand new. Bicklin introduced it to the United States in 1991. So I found out afterwards that two of the people who were promoting FC primarily in Maine were at the University of Maine, and that's who I took workshops with. So at the time, Maine, Vermont, and New York were really big into facilitated communication. I only learned this much later, but at the time, it actually makes sense that it would kind of like start seeping into the school system. And so that's how I got involved with it. I didn't, it seemed easy enough. I kind of learned along with the person who came in with my student. She was an ed tech, but she had taken the training at the University of Maine, which to me gave it some credibility, even though it was this new revolutionary thing at the time.
Real briefly, were you a master's trained speech language pathologist, or were you more like an aide or an assistant?
No, at the time, the qualifications hadn't changed yet, so I have a dual certification. It's a bachelor's degree in elementary education and speech language as a speech language clinician. They made a distinction between clinicians and pathologists. So if you had, and at the time, this was early 90s, at the time you could teach in the public schools as a speech language person without a master's degree.
I see.
And then later, like 4 or 5 years later, it changed. I left teaching in 1998. And that's about the time that the certifications were also changing. It was all evolving.
I see.
So yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Yeah.
So it probably would have helped if I had had a master's degree, because how do I say this? I was good at what I knew, but I didn't have the training to deal with autism. I probably had maybe a semester or two about language development in people with autism and others. My training was good for what it was. The program that I went through was fine, but it wasn't enough.
Yeah.
And I think it was a good thing that eventually they changed the master's qualifications, and ASHA certification also. You didn't have to have an ASHA certification to teach in the public schools back then as a speech clinician. So education, I could have used more education, but this is all looking back, it's easy in hindsight. It's easy to say, oh, if I had done this or I zigged instead of zagged, and it would have been fine. But
Yeah, and I also don't know, I mean, obviously, I wasn't practicing back then, I was a student at the time, but, like, I think I was in starting middle school around that time, I believe,
oh,
so
yeesh.
yeah, sorry, I don't know, that's
Just a young
yeah,
pup.
just a little young, comparatively, but, yeah, I don't know how much autism really was part of the training, maybe some other like older SLPs out there who were training around that time could really comment on it or send me messages about it if you guys know out there.
Yeah, I'd be interested.
Because I wouldn't imagine the diagnosis would be as common back then either, like as it is now.
No. I did have a professor that worked with autistic children, but
Mhm.
and I think I took maybe a year or 2 with him in different classes, but I don't remember that it was well, we were mostly focusing on, like, speech sound development and a little bit
Mm.
less on language development. Not that I didn't have any, but,
Mhm.
yeah, I just think things were they were still pretty evolving.
Yeah.
And also, inclusion and all that kind of stuff was also evolving at the same time, which is, I think, in part why FC sort of kind of took hold because it was part of that whole movement.
Mm.
Computers were just starting, but they were super expensive.
Right.
And so, but FC was really easy. All you needed, it really was a photocopy of a letterboard, and you could start using facilitated communication. So,
Mhm.
and my budget, frankly, was pretty much zero when I was, and so, um, I think and it was sort of marketed
Right.
as something that was really easy to implement. Anybody could do it, just have to take a training. But back then, it was just a 2-day training. Now they've changed
Oh.
with the false allegations of abuse cases that happened in the mid-1990s,
Mhm.
including the one I was involved with. They quote unquote changed the guidelines. Um, so they're like, "Well, no, you have to keep coming back. You have to take more than a 2-day training. You have to just keep coming back."
Yeah.
But that's not how it was back then. We took a 2-day workshop and we were good to go.
Oh, I see. Huh. Is it like they still do a 2-day workshop and then they have like continuing education type stuff now? Is that how they do
Yeah,
it?
you have to keep coming. Yeah, you have to keep. You're not
I
you're
see.
not officially uh considered a facilitator after the 2-day training, but you can start working with people and you have to keep checking in with people at Syracuse or wherever. I mean,
Um,
that's also hard to tell because there's so many different quote unquote types of facilitated communication now, and everybody's got their little spin on it. But
right.
the Syracuse-based facilitators, um, after the mid 1990s, like 1995 and beyond that, had to keep going back to Syracuse every year or maybe even twice a year
Mm.
to get recertified or something, like there's
Oh.
no certification for it.
Yeah, right, but like
But to
yeah.
for Syracuse people to say that you were a master trainer or a master facilitator or whatever, you had to keep going back
Oh,
every
interesting.
year or or twice a year, spring and fall, for a training.
Interesting. Okay.
But that none of that was in place when I was involved with it.
Right.
So,
Right.
it's much different. I mean, the people like, critics of me now, try to compare it to now, but the times are much different back then. Like, FC was brand new, and they didn't have all these so-called regulations and guidelines and things, which to me are pretty meaningless, but just the same, they're like, "Oh, you only took a 2-day workshop and you're a facilitator." I'm like, "Yeah, that's what they told us would," like,
That's how it worked back then.
yeah, I have CEUs for it. We
Yeah.
were no talk about, like, you have to come back for more training. Uh,
Yeah. Wow. And I was just saying, just to get the terminology in my own head a little more clear
Sure.
as we talk. So when you say facilitated communication or FC, that do you think of that as like the umbrella term for
Okay.
all the other new things that have sort of branched off from that? Or do you
Yeah.
feel like there's a little bit of a distinction?
That's a really good question. Yeah. Well, originally FC meant touch-based FC. So you held on to the
Mhm.
person's wrist or shoulder or elbow or whatever and with a light touch and supported them while they touched letters on a letterboard.
Mhm.
So that's what most people see as facilitated communication. And as the, testing came in, like, in the mid 1995 by 1995, ASHA had come out with an opposition statement, and the American Psychological Association
Mm.
had come out with opposition statements to facilitated communication based on the testing that was coming out.
Oh, okay.
So the false allegations of abuse the authorship testing had started. I'm just going on a little rampage, and then I'll come back to
No
FC as an
worries. Yeah.
umbrella term.
Go right ahead. Yeah.
Um, FC had s FC had started to receive criticisms even before it came to the United States. Australia was already questioning it. So Bicklin brought it over to the United States, and then so the United States had to catch up.
Mm.
But so, the control testing had started around 1992, 93. It was sort of, um, uh, sped up because of the false allegations of abuse cases that were coming out,
Mhm.
and, but all of the testing wasn't necessarily based on the false allegations of abuse. There were just people who wanted to understand what they were
Mm.
implementing in their programs. So by 1995-ish, 1996, there was a lot of pushback with facilitated communication and concerns about authorship
Mm.
right across the country. Because by then, there were hundreds of facilitators that had been tested, and all of the controlled studies. It's not all of the studies, because the facilitated communication people did some studies too, but all of the controlled studies, the studies that separated out the facilitator's behaviors with the person being facilitated, their behaviors showed that the facilitators were doing the communicating.
Ah.
And so instead of responding to that, the FC proponents started developing ways to use facilitated communication that weren't as touch-based focused. So that's when they started holding the letterboards in the air and having the person hold their finger up towards the letterboard, but they didn't take into consideration facilitator cueing, and there's tons of ways that facilitators cue
Mhm.
verbally, physically, and, visually. So, they can use hand signals, they can move their heads, they can, um, say the sounds that they want the person to like, if you wanted somebody to point to the letter A, they can say, "Well, your turn."
Right. And I think, not nowadays, especially I mean, I went to my master's in 2012 through 2014. But nowadays, when you're in an evaluation, when you're in that, like, practicum, that clinical stage of training, you learn that, like, there's so many ways you can accidentally give the answer to a kid when you're
Yeah.
evaluating them,
Yeah.
right? With
Yeah.
any kind of standardized test. So, similar, right? Similar idea, like,
Very
all
similar.
those things still definitely apply if you're doing this type of work, I guess, yeah.
Well, and as a facilitator, you're not supposed to look. You're not the part of the guidelines always has been do not test.
Mm.
So when you put that do not test in there, because if you test, then the early FC workshops, and I think it's still there today, um, they talked a lot about trust. You know, the person isn't going to facilitate with you unless you build this trust with them.
Mhm.
You have to presume competence. You have to build this trust, and the people that FC didn't work with everybody. Only the special ones that the students trusted you. right?
Hmm.
So it's
Okay.
all about trust and don't test. And so facilitators, when they're, or at least in my experience and from what I've read from the literature, you're kind of self-conscious when you first start it. So you're going to catch some of your mistakes that you make. Oh, I moved the kid's hand that time, but I won't next time.
Mm.
So you tell yourself these things. And so the more automatic the movements become, and I was trained in touch-based FC, so the more automatic the movements become, the more it feels like the communications are coming from the other person. I can't really
I see.
it's hard to explain it.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. I think that does make some sense, though. It's like because you're consciously trying to keep yourself from prompting them, you feel that you're successfully not prompting them.
r
Basically, it's like you kind of train yourself to think, "I'm aware of this, therefore I'm not doing it," in a
correct.
way.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And the
Yeah.
movements become like they're not resisting. They're just going along with it. So the more
Right.
there's no no conscious resistance,
Mhm.
the more it feels like it's quote unquote working.
I see. Is there ever anything built into the training where you would be expected to ask the student or client you're working with, "Did I get that right? Is that what you wanted, or is that what you actually said?"
No,
No double checks like that.
no
Okay.
double checks, and no double checks for comprehension either. The assumption is that they have intact language and literacy
Right.
skills, which doesn't make any
Huh.
sense to me anymore, but they have intact language and literacy skills, so you're just providing the support. They already know this information.
I
They
see.
they've got it from the environment or from reading street signs or listening to the
Mm.
radio, and
Mhm.
you're just providing the emotional and physical support so that
I
they
see.
can communicate independently.
Interesting. I was just thinking because when I think of, like, trust and communication, like, in the trauma-informed sense, but just in general, even as just an SLP, um, communication breakdowns and being able to repair those is kind of an essential part of how we learn how to build relationships and communicate with each other and build that trust really, right? It's like how someone responds if it's like, "No, that's not what I meant," and then they actually give you a chance to re-explain yourself or something like that. So I think it's interesting. I'm gonna It seems like that was what those facilitator trainers thought were testing someone, is like being like, "Was that what you meant? Did I get that right?"
Yeah,
Or,
yeah.
but I think of that as just a natural part of communication when you're getting to know someone in a way, right? To be like, "Did you want the grape juice or did you want apple juice? Did I get that right?" Right,
Yeah, but see, that doesn't work either. That doesn't necessarily work either as a facilitator, and I'll give you an example, and I can't it was 30 years ago, I don't have my notes, so I can't tell you exactly what my student and I talked about, but here's an example. You ask the person, what would you like for lunch?" There's hamburger and pizza for lunch,
Okay.
and they type out pizza, right? So that's the facilitated answer is pizza. And then you walk down the hallway and you get to the cafeteria and the person chooses a hamburger. Well, instead of in the facilitator's head, instead of saying, "Well, you know, that was, the typed answer was wrong," it's like, "Oh, good, she changed her mind. She's being
Oh,
thinking independently and she chose hamburger and she must have just changed her mind from the special
right.
ed room to the cafeteria."
Which is fair, but, like, there could still be a double check just to make sure, like,
But there isn't that's not what was built into the training.
I
No,
see.
you don't. It's not like I've seen, like, iTran, I think they call no, E-Tran boards where they hold up the letterboard and the person it's more like a eye gaze system
Ah,
where the
okay.
person looks at the red square and then there's A, B, C, and they pick a letter from that. And there's constant communication from the assistant and the person who's communicating. So did you pick the red one and the person gives some sort of even if they can't speak, they could still nod their head, or they could, give
Give an indication. Yeah, right.
some sort of signal that they meant the A, the red square, and then, "Did you mean the A? It looks like you're looking at the A. Did you?" And yes, that doesn't happen with FC. It's more they've touched the letter, or you think that they've touched the letter. There's problems with that too. And that's what they meant.
That's
That
interesting.
there isn't that check.
Like, I can see, I guess, from my perspective too, thinking of like neurodivergent affirming and presuming competence. Like, and I can understand how people might think it sounds like you're presuming competence, but at the same time, to me, it's almost like you're jumping to a conclusion about somebody and you're thinking that they have mastered communication to the point where they won't maybe make a little error. Like, I guess I think of it like if I'm learning a foreign language, right? Like, I might, if somebody asks me what I want to eat, I might use the wrong word, even though, and I just got it jumbled in my head. What was pizza? What was hamburger? What does that mean?
Mm-hmm.
And when I see the objects, I think, oh, I actually want that.
Mm-hmm.
I want the hamburger, right? And then if I'm in a foreign language class, I want my teacher to correct me, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I want that input of like, oh, you meant this word. Oh, and it's like, okay, great. That'll help me if I go to the country and I want to chat with people, and I want to get myself around. I got to know I'm using the right words to do it. And so it's an interesting, I guess, sort of a nuanced difference there between like presuming, yes, they're competent, they know what they want, but that doesn't always mean that the teacher shouldn't double check just to make sure that they didn't misunderstand, or that they just selected the wrong word, or they selected the wrong letter, or whatever, So it's very interesting.
Yeah, that makes sense to me now, but
yeah, right.
It didn't, as a facilitator. The other thing is
Yeah.
the person can be saying yes and typing no. And so what do you do then? You're taught to ignore the verbal behavior and just go with the written language, with the facilitated message.
That's interesting.
Because, they have this, because verbal language to facilitate, and I'm talking as a facilitator, isn't reliable.
Interesting.
Only the written typed messages are reliable. So, like, there's lots of examples in the FC sessions that I've looked at, or even in the movies and stuff. There's a movie, The Reason I Jump. I'm pretty sure this is an example from that movie, where the young woman is sitting on a park bench with her mom, and her mom's facilitating with her, and she's saying no more, and the mother's typing out all this stuff, about how their relationship has improved, or whatever the message was. Like, it's totally different than what the person is actually verbally saying.
Interesting.
And the person, when I look at it, the young girl is protesting. She doesn't want to, like, with her behavior, like, and all that is ignored. Only the written the facilitated spelling is considered valid.
So it's like presuming competency, but only with the AAC device, basically, versus like multimodality communication,
right,
and using body language and voice. That's also interesting because I know in AAC research, it's shown that, if you give a kid like a speech generating device, for example, there's that whole myth that they'll never learn to talk because now they have this device. And that's actually a myth, because 9 times out of 10, they actually do start talking more when they do have the device, and they can, whether it's rehearsal or whether it's just maturity and, what have you. So it's interesting to me. Have there been children who worked with a facilitator who then developed the ability to speak later? And do you know of any cases like that?
I don't.
Okay.
No.
It's interesting. Okay. Yeah.
I'm trying to think. No, they have in some cases learned to facilitate with the parent just sitting in the room with them, or the facilitator sitting in the room with them, but they always have to be within visual or auditory range.
Interesting.
Of the facilitator.
And also for those kids, like the one you saw in the movie who was saying like, no more, no more. It's interesting to me because I could see like one interpretation could be they're never going to really learn how to talk anyway. That's why you don't see people who learn how to talk, because these aren't people who have the ability to do that, which is okay. You don't have to use your mouth. Whatever. Yeah. Right. But I do also find it interesting because as a, like, trying to put myself in the shoes as like a kid, right? If I'm trying to verbalize a request, if I'm trying to speak a request and it continuously gets ignored, I'm probably going to stop making that request, right? So it's kind of an interesting, like, what is actually at the root there? And if you don't do any sort of testing or reflecting or trying to figure out why there's this difference between like current AAC research showing that kids pick up more speaking as they use a device versus what they're seeing in FC, it's like you'll never know. Is it these kids just literally never would, or is it that the voice is being ignored anyway, so why use it? You know?
Yeah, that reminds me of a study from Canada, I think, where they were testing people with for authorship in FC. Some of the individuals included in the group had like limited literacy skills, so they could on independently without a facilitator, they could type a limited amount of words. And they found that during the testing, they weren't testing for this specifically, but they found as they did the study over time, the students that were using facilitated communication who also had limited literacy skills lost the ability to communicate independently as time went on, because they came the researchers thought it was sort of this passive, you know, you're giving up responsibility for your communication to the person who's who you're facilitating with. So there was this, they just, it's like, it's easier just to have the facilitator point to the letters for me. Why wouldn't you? Communication is really difficult, and so if somebody's gonna, like, this was a touch-based form of facilitated communication, but I would assume that it's also true for, I'd like to see a study done.
Yeah, right. It would be nice.
With the so-called no-touch forms of FC, because I think the results would be exactly the same.
Yeah. Well, we have to have internalized motivation to communicate. Like, without any reciprocation or any acknowledgement for our own internal thoughts and what we want to say, we're just going to give. I mean, that's essentially the same psychological premise around like gray rocking, for example. Like when people talk about narcissistic stuff and they talk about like, I don't know if you've heard of like Darvo and all that stuff when it comes to, I mean, this is like information holes I go down outside of my specialty, but gray rocking is the concept of like, if someone with a narcissistic personality is, they're going to deny, they're going to attack you, they're going to say you're actually the one who's victimizing them and all of this. And the only really power you have in that situation is to just sort of stop acknowledging that they're talking, kind of. You just kind of do you do like a smile and nod, like, sure, yeah, I guess, yep, you're right, okay, and then you just move on, because like you don't have the power, you're the victim, so you're never going to be able to get them to stand down, basically, right? So I just find that really interesting because it goes right along with that stuff, but also just in general, the idea of you need internal motivation, you need to have some success in terms of having someone reciprocate, having someone, address your needs, acknowledge your protests, right? Like this is all part of building safe relationships when it comes to trust and that kind of connection. So it is interesting to think of that, where it's like, yeah, I could see that if you're not being listened to, you would probably just be like, well,
abdicate control.
Yeah.
Well, I've seen some YouTube. I'm interested to get your perspective on this too. I've seen some videos of FC sessions where, especially with the touch base, but sometimes with the no touch forms of FC, where it seems almost like a self-stimming kind of behavior for the, I don't know that it's meant to from the facilitator isn't perceiving it as that, but the kid is like looking into space and just like waving their finger towards the board or whatever, or having the person hold their
Mhm.
hand, and
Mhm.
it
Mhm.
really comes across to me as that might be comforting for that person in some way. They're just tuning out and letting that sensory stuff go.
I mean, it's very possible. It could be stimming. I mean, there is also, especially in the world of AAC these days, there is what I would interpret it this way, where, and I've had students and clients who do this, where you give them a device and they just kind of hit a button over and 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 over again. Or they just kind of hit random buttons constantly and they get the speech generation or whatever. And it looks a lot like stimming. But the thought is it could be stimming. It also could be like kind of babbling. Essentially, there is that thought
Interesting.
that maybe when they're presented with a new device, they kind of like the way people, babies babble to kind of figure out how to use their mouth, right? And for speaking and stuff. That's sort of the thought, is like
Hmm.
they're trying out the equipment, essentially.
Mm.
So it's like it would make sense to me, I guess, that an AAC user, if you hand them a new device that they've never seen before, they might just kind of try it out. What does this sound like? What does it sound like if I play this one? And
Yeah, especially if it's voice activated. B B B B B.
right, exactly. And maybe they run into a word that like they just like the way the voice says it, and it's like really cool. So then they sort of stem on it a bit. So it wouldn't be too surprising. I also see it happen with when it comes to looking away while you're pointing to things. I
Mm.
worked at a preschool once where that was part of their day, was to point at their picture schedules for like what's next. But those teachers used hand over hand so often, they would just kind of grab their hands and make them point to it and then send them on their way, that the
Mm.
kids just looked away constantly.
Wow.
And so I would work on them sometimes because some of those kids would get pretty dysregulated from having their hands grabbed sometimes. They would be like,
Sure.
they don't like it. So I would say, like, if use your eyes to tell your finger where to go, and here's my hand if you need it as like a guide. But eventually they were able to just like independently point to the pictures, and it kind of helped with the regulation around the transitions because it was less physical movement, less someone else physically moving them and more them being able to do it themselves. And then they felt a little more,
Interesting.
and it just kind of helped because some of those kids just got so dysregulated from we have to pull you over to the calendar and then you have to point at the icon and we'll force you to do that. And then we send you on your way. And the kid would just like look away and just let it happen, basically. Cause it's like, they're little, they can't fight back against like a larger adult, like they don't have that much power.
It actually sounds like my student.
Yeah.
She was in high school, but like if I'm sitting there really close to her and having her, do this and she's done, like I've got scars and she's like hit me and stuff, and um
Yeah. Like the protesting, right? Like that's pretty clear protesting.
yeah.
Yeah.
See, but I didn't take it as I took it as a break of the trust because I had my facilitator mindset.
I see.
This is why is she lashing out at me, somebody she trusts and communicates with? And so that led to, I don't know if you wanna talk about this but the false allegations of abuse,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
because then you're thinking, and this is like, in early 1990s, there was all kinds of, you know in the training, as a teacher, you go to workshops and they're like, the kids might be acting out at school and something might be happening at home. It was sort of like in the ether.
Yeah.
And so, like, for me, as a facilitator, I'm like, why is she breaking that trust? Like, she trusts me so much that she'll
Mm.
communicate me, and why is she hitting me? Well, she was hitting me because I was in her space, and she
Yeah.
was overstimulated, and she didn't want me
Right.
in her space anymore.
Yeah.
That's what I
And
think.
she has no way to tell you she wants a break. It's like not that she hates you. She just wants a break. She just wants to do her
I'm
thing.
done. Like, I'm done. And she knew she couldn't leave, like, so
Yeah.
I'm done with this.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that's also interesting, the psychology around like you wouldn't protest against someone you do trust because like once again, from the trauma informed perspective, I always kind of go that meta, more human level where it's like, wait a second. I mean, how many of us have not protested against someone we actually trust and love? Like, how many?
Yeah, yeah.
How many of us grew up in a household where your mom would be like, take out the trash, and you're like, I don't want to,
Yeah,
mom.
right, exactly.
Like,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
Or like your spouse asks you to do something, you're like, ugh, do I have to right now? Can I
Yeah.
just do that later?
Yeah.
Thanks. Like, like we all protest with people, even if they're the closest people in our lives and we trust
do.
them a lot.
Yeah.
A lot of that is why we protest with them, because we're safe to do so. Right. So
True.
it's interesting, or at least that's why our protests are like gentle protest. Once you feel safe to say it.
Hopefully, yeah. If you've got a healthy relationship, they're gentle.
Right.
Yeah.
But if it's not healthy, that's when you might get a little more forceful with your demands, to some extent, right?
Yeah.
So it is an interesting part of the training and the psychology in that sense of like, if they trust you, they'll never protest. When I'm like thinking kids protest all the time.
Sure,
like,
they do.
All the time. All kids, regardless of cognitive status or not, or what have you.
If she was typing, she should have, if it was the typing was really coming from her, she would have typed out, "I'm done. I don't want to do this anymore. Or get out of my space," or whatever. But those aren't the kinds of communications you generally get through facilitated communication. They don't sound like real kids.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's also an interesting thing of like how much my professors drove home multimodality communication, honor multimodality, honor multimodality. It was always that like, it doesn't have to be the device. It doesn't have to be whatever AAC you're using. It can be eye gaze. It can be body language. It can be vocalization. It doesn't matter. You honor it. If you're seeing a protest, address it, honor it, acknowledge it. Same with requests. Same with, whatever the pragmatic intent is behind it. Like don't just let that lie. And it's just interesting that that's a difference there in terms of what the training you had, and I'm assuming what more current iterations have, in the sense of, I mean, possibly, I don't know if the current ones have that, where it's like,
Yeah, I am. When I was trained, they talked a lot about using different modalities, but that's not what happened in real life. In real life, once you started using FC, that was the only thing you used. In spelling to communicate and rapid prompting method, which is how this gets back to, is it all FC?
yeah,
It took us, what, half an hour or something to get back to this point? But
this works.
So at some point, FC, the touch-based FC turned into or transformed into the no-touch forms of FC that exist today. And you can trace the line from the person, Soma Mukherjee, I'm sure I'm butchering her last name, but she's the quote-unquote inventor of rapid prompting method, and she started out with traditional touch-based FC, but was getting pushback, and so she wanted to develop something that looked different than touch-based FC, because to proponents, the problem with FC wasn't that it doesn't work. You can't have a dependent form of communication that leads to independent communication. But because people were saying back then, who's doing the pointing, who's touch, they were really focused on the touch part of FC and not the general,
like with the court cases and all of that.
Right. Not the generalized cueing and not the comprehension problems or any of that. It was like, who's doing the pointing? So in facilitators' heads, they're like, we know this works, but we need to come up with a way that looks different than touch-based FC. So the no-touch forms of FC started occurring, where the facilitator held the letterboard in the air, and the person who was being facilitated, without being touched, would point or you can train somebody to point their hand or finger towards the letterboard. And so that's how that all developed. So I call it all FC, but traditionalists will say there was a touch-based facilitated communication, and then there's spelling to communicate and rapid prompting method and spelling method. We've got, like, on our website, we've got 26 or 27 different names for facilitated communication. Supported typing, informative pointing, but it's all, if you look at the facilitator behaviors, that's what I encourage people to do. You can and say, how much work is a facilitator doing to get the spelling to come across? What behaviors are they exhibiting rather than the person being facilitated?
And that is where I'm going to go ahead and leave part 1 off here. Tune in another week or two for part 2 of my interview with Janice. And I hope you enjoyed that one. If you have any ideas or suggestions or thoughts that came up during this, let me know, but also go head over to Patreon since it's a free access. You might as well click on over there. And there's a place to send me messages, I think under the chat option. Send me a message through that, or maybe present a chat topic if you want to talk about this a little bit further. I would love to hear everyone's thoughts on what we've discussed so far on this episode. And get ready for part 2. More fascinating stuff to come. In the meantime, while waiting, I hope you can treat yourself with a lot of kindness. And until next time, thanks for listening. Bye.